Day 43, Little Bighorn National Monument. So this was a 350-mile round trip between Cody, Wyoming and Little Bighorn, Montana, but I absolutely had to do it. As the United States was expanding westwards, there were a lot of treaties signed between the government and the Native American tribes. All of them said pretty much the same thing. You get to keep certain lands, we get to use certain lands in exchange for support and the right of safe passage and who knows what else. And none of those treaties, like this one, the Treaty of Fort Laramie, were worth the paper they were written on. All of them were broken by the government sooner or later, and usually sooner than later. The Treaty of Fort Laramie promised the Dakota Indians the ownership of the Black Hills area, which was a sacred ground for them. And it also promised them that they can roam the plains freely as long as the buffalo roams. But then, in the 1870s, gold was discovered in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And the word got out, and prospectors started getting there and being killed by the Indians. The government tried to buy the Black Hills from them, and they wouldn't budge. And in the meantime, U.S. economy experienced a depression and inflation, and they just needed that gold and that money. So President Grant just decided, screw it. We're taking the Black Hills, and the Indians can't roam freely like they used to before. And anybody who is not on a reservation by a certain date, we're gonna go out and hunt them and bring them in by force. So General George Custer, a popular and celebrated Civil War hero and a troublemaker, sets out with his cavalry regiment from Fort Abraham Lincoln in North Dakota out west towards Montana to locate and hunt down the biggest roaming bands of Lakota and Cheyenne Indians and bring them to the reservations. Around the Little Bighorn River Basin in Montana, Custer's scouts told him there is a huge roaming village of Indians ahead. And he was very excited because he thought that he is going to round them up and fulfill his mission. They didn't realize, though, how big the village was. It was about 8,000 or 9,000 men. And all Custer had were 5 companies, which was about 250 cavalrymen. Custer feared that the Indians became aware of his presence and that he is losing the element of surprise. So he decided not to wait for the next day for reinforcements and attack with whatever he had. He sent 2 companies to attack the village from the south, and they were almost instantly overwhelmed and chased off by the warriors. And whatever soldiers survived did so because they managed to make it to the higher ground on those hills where they met with the reinforcements coming in from the south. And Custer himself, with about 40 or 50 surviving soldiers, made their famous last stand on this bluff. They killed their horses to create some kind of a barrier and cover against the Indian bullet fire. And it did help for a while. But when the Indians ran out of bullets, they started shooting arrows, and the dead horses were no help against the arrows coming in from above. So eventually, Custer and all his men were killed. The Indian village dispersed and evaporated on the same day, and when a couple of days later reinforcements arrived, all they saw was the carnage of the battlefield and the corpses that were sitting out in the open and in the heat for a couple of days. And they didn't even have tools to bury them. They were using the forks and knives and whatever they had. So most soldiers were just covered with a sprinkling of dust, and Custer got the best burial of them all of 18 inches of dirt. 2 years later, at the insistence of Custer's family and the general public, United States Army arrived again at Little Bighorn to try to rebury the dead. And what they saw was that all the bones were unearthed by scavengers and the weather. So they just put everyone in a mass grave, but they were looking for Custer. and they found somebody with shreds of uniform on him, but it was the wrong rank. It was not a general. But they needed to come back with a coffin. So they just put that body in there, and that was it. Now, officially, General George Custer is buried at a cemetery at West Point, New York, near the military academy. But in all likelihood, he shares this mass grave with his soldiers. Today, the national monument consists of the Custer National Cemetery, the Visitor Center, and the surrounding hills themselves, where markers are placed in every place that they were able to determine somebody died. White markers are for the U.S. soldiers and the Indian scouts that were fighting with them, and the red-brown markers are for the Indian warriors. There is a monument above the mass grave with the names of all the soldiers, a marker for the horses killed in the battle, and a beautiful, stunning memorial for all the Indians that fell in the battle, both on the side of the Lakota and Cheyenne and on the side of the federal government. And it has plaques for every tribe and every chief that participated in the fight on either side, and a beautiful sculpture on top of it called the Spirit Warriors. This was a tremendous, legendary victory for the Lakota and Dakota Indians and their chiefs, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. But the problem was, of course, it didn't help. It was a situation of win the battle and lose the war. Still, it was a very big blow for the United States Army as well, and was a huge story back then. But anyway, this was where my exposure to this aspect of American history came full circle. What started out completely by accident back in Fort Abraham Lincoln in North Dakota, and then continued in the Black Hills of South Dakota at Crazy Horse Memorial, and then at Fort Robinson in Nebraska, got its conclusion at Little Bighorn in Montana.